What's up, YouTube? Making this video today because I had a few people ask me about my amp installation for my wake towers. I had an issue with my RCA cable. I have an RCA to 3.5 millimeter jack, and that's how I plug in my phone to use for music. And I had a problem with the wire, just started messing up, so it's a break in the wire somewhere, so I was having to replace it. And while I was doing that, decided to go ahead and try to make a quick video explaining what I did, how I installed it. It may not be what you want to do. You can kind of get ideas from it, but I'll show you exactly what I did from the battery all the way back. Might help some people out. Just had a few people asking, so I figured I'd go ahead and show it all. Okay, the reason, as I mentioned, that I even am doing this right now is my RCA wire going up to a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack had a section, about 8-inch section, that I tried to fix, did not work, so I'm replacing it. But basically it started cutting out, wires got messed up inside the line. One side cut out completely, the other side just started breaking up, so it was just time to change it. But anyway, this is an item you'll need: 3.5 millimeter headphone jack and RCA cables. This goes straight to this wire here, which is supplied with this amp. As I took it apart, and I'll show you what the hose, you see I got the line running through the hose. That's just how I sealed it in an ammo can. As I took everything apart, I noticed I did not have my ammo can locked, so it was half full of water, so I had to let this dry out for about 3 days, but it still works great. This amp here has been submerged twice, Rockford Fosgate Marine amp. I actually put the type exactly in the video of my speakers and everything, so if you need to know what it is exactly, that's where the info is on that. But basically everything plugs directly into it. All the plugs come with it. Here's my power, ground, and remote, and this would be my speaker input, or output, sorry. Okay, so basically I just made a can, sealed it up. I got RTV and a little rubber gasket that I made out of just a piece of flat rubber. Everything I've gotten from Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever. Here's where you can see the other end of that RCA cable goes into the box to hook up to the amp. I'm not sure what size you'll need. I got a 10-foot strip of RCA cable, just to make sure it gets where I need it to go. But again, I don't have the details of what all I use, because this has been about 4 or 5 years that I put it on there. Basically I just cut a hole in the side of the can, sealed it up, wires go through with no problem. If you're using a metal can and you try to run the wires through and just seal up around the wires, more than likely the metal hole that you cut will eventually cut into the wires. This way you're actually putting a pipe through there, so they're just free hanging in there. They don't actually do anything. It's a little more to it than just sealing up a wire and running the wire up, because I had to run this tube up. Basically the reason for this tube was originally, before I extended my snorkels, I just ran this up similar to a snorkel from my ammo can up to the top of the radiator. That way it did not get water in it, and I didn't actually have to seal it. Well, since I extended my snorkels up, I had to actually seal the wires and everything off so they did not drown. Easy thing with that, just put a little expanding foam. Same thing, get it from Home Depot, Lowe's. Filled up the hole just a little bit. It will seal up every crack in there. All the wires are sealed in there. They aren't going anywhere. So I guess from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of show you from the battery all the way to the amp, show you exactly what I did. All right, you may need to pause this if you're actually using this to kind of as a guide. Like I said, this is how I did it. You don't necessarily need to do everything I did because I have extra switches added for lighting and stuff like that. But if you come to the battery, I've actually got 3 wires connected to it right now. One is the main harness, one is a fuse panel I put in, and the other is I guess is my, hold on. Okay, so one goes to the amp and fuse panel, one goes to my winch, and the other is the main harness. Same thing on the ground side. I've got a winch wire, main harness wire, and I want to say that's a ground, but I don't know why I grounded it way back here. Normally what you would want to do is ground as close to the source or the load as possible, which would be, you want to ground it close to your amp, which I believe my amp I did ground that way. I believe that is just to my fuse panel. I think that's how I ran that. It's been a while since it's been on there. So on the positive side, 8 gauge wire is what I used. I took 8 gauge around. Always put a fuse close to the battery. I think this is probably a 30 amp fuse, maybe 60. I'm not sure which size I used on these, but basically I've got a splitter here. All this is a solid block. 8 gauge goes in. Actually, you know what? I may have 4 gauge going in. Okay, yeah. So I've got 4 gauge running off of the battery back to this block splitter. 4 gauge goes into, you can split it into 4 8 gauge lines. I got 2 coming off of it and a fuse. So one of these fuses goes to a fuse panel that I added underneath the dash here. If I can see it, you can kind of see it down in there. It's just a little 4-blade fuse panel that basically runs all my switches for lighting. I actually have a switch for the stereo, but that's actually, yes, it does run through there, so power going to that switch. The other wiring goes straight to my amp. 8 gauge, 10 gauge I think is what minimum they require for that amp. Again, it's all in the instructions, tells you what you need, but 8 gauges will get you better power. So I ran from the block to a fuse. From the fuse, run the wire wherever you can. I can't exactly show you where I ran it, but the main 2 things you don't want to do is make sure it's not pinched somewhere on the frame where it will wear through the coating on the wire, and do not put it near the exhaust or anything that gets extremely hot to melt the wire. You can even see a little bit there where that rubs. That's just from my seat, but you can see it does affect the wire slightly. This hasn't even worn through any, so it's not a problem. But then from there, ran it all the way up here. This is where I went into this tube. This tube is all it is a vacuum hose for a pool. Home Depot and Lowe's has it. Once you come down, I actually, when it's installed, and I'll show you when I put it back in, I put a loop in it. That way if you ever did get water in, the water would get stuck in the loop. It would not push itself away around and go into the amp. Now when I come down into here, same thing with speaker wires. The speaker wires are just run from the tubes up here on the mounted on the radiator down through this hole, this pipe here, and into the box. You've got this plug here which comes with the amp, and it has your power wire, your ground, and your remote. The remote basically goes from here up to a switch on the dash, and then from the switch on the dash to the fuse panel that I added. That's where you get power for it. So when you flip that switch on, it activates the remote, which turns on your amp. The thing I want to add in here is the last thing you want to actually hook up is the battery. When you're running all this stuff, you do not want loose wires with power already hooked to them. So wait until the very end to hook up your battery. And this end here, as far as connections, fuses, put the fuse in last. You can put the fuse in or the, power. Best thing is probably save the battery completely till last. I don't want someone following me and then burning their four-wheeler to the ground, that kind of stuff. So hook power up last, you shouldn't have these issues. Double check all your connections, make sure everything is where it's supposed to be, make sure everything is good and tight, that it's not going to come loose. Just something I wanted to add in there. So my ground going through here, like I said, you always want to ground it as close to your amp as possible. So when I came up through the top, I mounted, or not mounted, I grounded it right here on the frame for the XMR radiator. It just comes straight out of this tube to here. That's as close as you can get once you come out of the tube. There's nowhere else, closer, I wouldn't imagine. That's it for your ground. Just you want to, I definitely checked that to make sure it was a good ground, and it is. I've had no issues with it whatsoever as far as power is concerned. Okay, so coming down here, the other plug that you have is this little wire harness here, and again comes with the amp. This is for your speaker level input, or sorry, this is for your speaker output. So this basically just runs to all your speakers. Very simple. Plug it into the amp and it is good to go. This one is going to be your RCAs. Same thing, plug it into the amp. Plug your RCA adapter to 3.5 millimeter, 3.5 millimeter wire, which is this one here. This is my replacement. That's going to be hooked up, and it'll eventually, I'll have to run it back up here to the handlebars where I can plug it into my phone. And what I've got to do is I've got to run it basically through this line, and the same thing, create a loop. That way if water enters the end, it will stop right in this area. It will not go back up and then come back down again. It's the way gravity water works. So from there, I'm going to start putting everything back in. I had some little foam pieces to cushion the amp so it's not just sitting in there banging around. They've kind of wore down from getting wet, so I'm going to have to think of something else to put in there. I think what I'm going to end up doing is using a few pieces of this hosing, just cut it, stick it in there. When the amp's in there, it'll basically rest against it, kind of spring, have like a spring cushion on the sides basically. Alright, to give you a quick review of how I've got it hooked up, you can see these plug right into the side of the amp, power, ground, remote, and speakers coming out. On the other end, you have the plug for input, which goes to the RCA jacks, which once installed, run up through here, run to this wire here. Alright, so now what I've got to do is figure out how I'm going to actually kind of support the amp in the box. See, I've got a piece of that hose down in the bottom. It's hard enough that it's not going to let it bounce around. Put in a couple other pieces here and there, basically to keep it from hitting the sides. Keep it nice and snug in there. These are pieces I've had in here for a while. It's not going anywhere. Probably cut a few more these in half to just, like I said, to wedge it to where it's not banging against stuff. That's the first thing that'll, other than heat, that's the worst thing for your amp. Let me think. I'm going to tape these up so they don't come unhooked from bouncing around in there. Anything you don't want to come loose, little tape will hold it together so they, basically just keep good connection while you're riding. Then I will close it up and put it back in. I believe that is everything. Just got to run this wire here and hose back up. When I put the can back in there, it twists this around and creates the loop that I was talking about earlier. But I will show you when I get to that. Right, so you can see what I did here. just very simple. It's not going to move, but this stuff doesn't hold heat because it's very thin. Lets air flow. This amp also has a couple of fans in the end. That is not a burn, that is actually mud and a spot where it was sitting up against, I believe, actually I don't know what it was sitting up against, but it was rubbing, so I made sure to make it where it's not going anywhere this time. But you can see it's all packed in there nice and tight so it doesn't bang around. Actually, let me put a little piece right there because that looks like it's going to hit that pipe in there. Another thing, you know, like I said, you don't want it to rub anything, damage it. And then I'm going to close it up, put it up in there. Okay, once I got it closed up, I ended up having to put a zip tie on here. This latch seems to be popping open pretty easy for some reason. Still seals up good and everything, so I just put a zip tie to hold that latch down. And you may find other ways you want to do this, but that's up to you. Okay, so when I run the hose up through here, just run the wire up underneath where the dash is. It'll sit here, my phone sits here, plug it in, good to go. You can see I put some more expanding foam in the end of that. I only put a very little bit in, maybe to here, maybe not even that much, just enough that when it expands it only comes up to this area here. So if you do ever have to change this cord, which I just had to do, you can cut off about that much of the hose and the rest of the hose is fine. Alright, you can see with the can sitting back in there, the hose comes up, does a loop, and then goes back up again, like I said, to keep water from getting in there. All depends on what you use to come out. I probably would not necessarily need the hoses if I did it again, because of the fact that I didn't end up with it being snorkeled at the top like I intended it from the beginning. I planned on keeping it snorkeled, but because of going higher I had to seal them off. So you could just come out with anything through here as long as you have a rubber grommet on the metal for the wires to come through. You could seal it just with a rubber grommet and it'll be fine, and then your wires can just go up. That saves you a lot of trouble as far as these hoses, because they're not fun to get in and out of there. Make it easier for access. Just something I would probably do different if I did it again. Alright, so a quick recap just to try to make sure I didn't miss anything. From the battery, hook it up last. Battery, in this case, is a block. If you're just doing the amp, one wire 8 gauge will work fine from the battery. 8 gauge to a fuse, usually within 18 inches of the battery is what they say, they recommend. The reason for this is if you have a short where the wire touches something up here, it will blow that fuse, and then the only powered part will be from here to the battery, versus if you put a fuse way up at the front, it will pop there, but that means everything from there back is still live. So if anything else happens to pop open, rip open, cut open, and grounds out, you could potentially, you know, have a fire. From there, going down, however you need to go down, like I said, I wouldn't probably use these hoses if I was redoing. So basically you would just run wire down, run the wire down to your box or whatever you're putting it in. The amp, like I said, it's a marine amp. It's a 400 watt marine Rockford Fosgate. It's a 2-channel. They make 4-channel, you know, all different sizes. Basically the same setup as a automobile. But run your wires however you want out of a can. Put it in plastic can, ammo can, put it in whatever you want that you want to seal it in. You could use an amp that does not seal, or sorry, that is not a marine amp if you want. But then, like I said, with this one, it's filled up with water twice because it popped open, and the amp still works 2 years later. So it's a very good amp. Marine is definitely the way you want to go if you can. They just, you know, a little more pricey. From there, run your RCA back up to your handlebars for plugging in your phone. I have a my phone case is waterproof the phone's waterproof, or water resistant, whatever it is. The case I have is Ghost Tech, and it's waterproof, and it comes with a little extension that you plug into the 3.5 jack that actually has a rubber boot, so when it actually is made for the case, so when you plug it in, it stays waterproof. That's a big thing. And here what I'll do is just tape this up so that it stays connected, and I won't have to worry about this again, unless the wire starts messing up again. Other than that, I just got to put everything back together. Hope this helps y'all. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask. I'm sure there'll be a few from people that don't do this kind of stuff, don't know what to do. It's not as hard as it seems, but it is just like with anything you haven't done before. The first time you go to do it, it's kind of, it seems like it's going to be more challenging, but it's pretty simple if you just take your time. That's the big thing. Take your time and double check everything. All right, take care, guys.